Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Laura Beth Ezel, and I'm so excited to welcome you to today's webinar, K through 12 Assessments, Current Challenges and Future Opportunities, hosted by Pearson and Industry Dive's K through 12 Dive. Amy Riley, take it away.
Thank you, Laura Beth. My name is Amy Riley. I'm the Vice President for Innovative Assessment Solutions here at Pearson, also former educator, and I'll be your moderator today. I don't need to tell you that the focus on assessment has intensified in K-12 education. Most states now require schools to administer a range of different types of assessments. With so much changing, especially as AI comes into play, we at Pearson wanted to help educators see where they stand relative to their peers. So we partnered with K-12 Dive Studio ID to survey K-12 educators and leaders from across the country to see what they have to say. And in this webinar, you'll hear about the most important takeaways from the survey. You'll find out how well classroom assessments are working. You'll see where the biggest gaps are. You'll hear about the most serious assessment struggles educators experience. But you'll also hear some great things as well. You'll hear practical advice on how to overcome these pain points and close any assessment gaps. Our panelists are doing exciting work in assessment, including by incorporating AI. So I can't wait for you to hear their thoughts. Before we dive into the conversation, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. First, we want to hear your questions, so submit them at any time using the Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen. We'll try and answer your questions during the webinar, but if time does run out, we will follow up via email. Also, the application widgets at the bottom of your screen are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to optimize your desktop space. The slides will advance automatically. To enlarge them, click the Enlarge Slides button in the top right-hand corner of your presentation window. Finally, we are recording the webinar. You'll be able to access the recording on demand using the link from today's event. Now, I'm excited to introduce our panelists. First, we have Dr. Tammy Kieses, a K-12 administrator and educational consultant with extensive experience as a school leader. Tammy has served as a principal of a public elementary school and the founding head of school at a K-8 day school. She's been an educational consultant for public, charter, Montessori, and private schools, providing professional development training and mentoring for administrators, school counselors, teachers, and staff. Tammy's also served as a lecturer and supervisor at the University of California, Irvine School of Education. Our other panelist is Nora Bowles. Nora teaches 5th grade math, science, and social studies in the School District of Philadelphia. She received her Master's of Science in Education from the University of Pennsylvania, where she participated in the Urban Teaching Apprenticeship Program. Nora began her career as an educator through AmeriCorps, serving as a reading interventionist at a Title I school in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Tammy and Nora. We're so excited to have you here. All right, let's begin with some key findings from Pearson's national survey. One is that K-12 educators believe in the importance of assessments. So about 7 out of 10 say assessments are very important for measuring skills like critical thinking and problem solving. The same numbers say it's very important to be able to measure students' progress towards specific learning goals. But that leads us to like a second takeaway. Their current assessment tools aren't nearly effective enough. In fact, there are gaps that appear in areas that educators consider most important to assess. So take a look at the numbers on the slide, for example. These are all capabilities that educators say are very important to have, but few educators say their assessment tools give them these capabilities. There's a lot more in the survey, but let's start with those points first. They're crucial to how school leaders and educators approach assessments. After all, the purpose of assessment is to understand what students have learned and then tailor instruction accordingly. So it's a big problem if educators don't feel like they can pinpoint student needs or personalize instruction based on assessments. Tammy, you have a ton of experience as a school leader, a teacher, and an educational consultant. Do you see these kinds of gaps when you think about assessments in the schools that you've worked with?
Yes, definitely. I think that one of the biggest complaints that we hear from teachers is that there's just too many assessments. And this survey, this really points to that there are just too many assessments. And the issue of assessing, and assessing isn't the problem as much as that we're not even pausing to stop and shift how we teach in order to do something with that important data. So really, it's easy to look at assessment as a burden when you're not really using it effectively, rather than tailoring it and personalizing instruction based on those feedback and that information. So really, for myself right now, I'm looking at how can K-12 leaders use assessments to help their teachers to better their instruction, and that really how to tailor their teaching based on that. So sometimes schools have layers upon layers of assessments. They're using benchmarks, they're using state assessments, they're using grade level assessments. And with all of that information, teachers could feel just overwhelmed, not knowing what to do with that information and how to synthesize it. But leaders can take a different approach and be more effective, knowing that teachers can and are capable of using assessments. But we have to ask ourselves, are we giving them enough autonomy? Are we supporting them in being independent decision makers? Do they have the training really to analyze the data and to use it so that they can help support their students and inform instruction? And even looking at, do they have the appropriate data tools to help themselves in their classrooms?
Thank you, Tammy. Nora, so you're a current teacher, so we'd love to hear your perspective about what do the current assessment gaps look like?
Yeah, I can definitely identify with the survey takeaways that you mentioned. Assessments are really useful for me as a teacher. I can see where my students are in each subject, their areas of strength, areas of growth, recent progress trajectory, and that helps me do things such as create small groups and adapt the instruction that I'm doing within my classroom. Now, when people hear the word assessment, I really think they mostly are imagining state testing, but I appreciate that there are a lot of different kinds of assessments. So I especially take advantage of weekly progress monitoring and formative assessments in the classroom, because I'm able to better adapt those to my students' needs, and they are frequent enough that I can also change instruction according to assessment data. Now, despite all that, I really see the gaps in our assessment and assessment systems that you've mentioned as well. That's especially true with assessments that occur less frequently, like baseline and benchmark assessments. Those could be semi-annually or monthly. State testing is usually just once a year, and those results come out the following year after kids have moved up a grade. And it's really, like Tammy said, so many different assessments. It's inundating teachers with data. And I have 40 to 50 students. It's really hard to make sense of all of that information in an effective way for every single student. As Tammy suggested, if we're not taking assessment results and using them to make instruction and teaching in the classroom more effective, then what's the point of giving all these assessments?
Thank you, Nora. The challenge of digesting all this assessment data is one of the biggest concerns educators cited in the survey. And it's one of the things that we hear the most at Pearson as well whenever we're talking to educators. In fact, only 42% of respondents strongly agree that the assessment data that they receive is actually easy to understand. Well, that's a big problem when that's really kind of the whole point of administering the assessment, to actually get the information so that you can make some sort of action. Difficulty accessing and interpreting the data contributes to the number one problem that educators identified in the survey, which is time. Many educators say assessment just take up way too much of their class time. Nora, I want to stay with you for just a minute. Can you talk about the time crunch as well as the problem of accessing and analyzing the data?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think any educators watching this webinar would be surprised to hear that time is the biggest issue when it comes to assessments that we found in the survey. Assessments can be really time consuming. In my experience, they can take full mornings, even up to full days away from instruction in the classroom. And time also comes into the picture because there's a time burden on teachers, and teachers very limited time, who may have to create the assessments and who always have to analyze the results of assessments for a whole number or caseload of students. The data piece is a big factor in assessment burden on teachers. One issue is that assessments are not all consistent. You have official state assessments, district and school-wide measures, as well as whatever assessments teachers themselves are giving in the classrooms. And all of that doesn't always align to each other. It doesn't always align to a curriculum. So teachers have to scramble to cover all of these different pieces to make sure students score well on each assessment. As a teacher, I have to pull the data afterwards also from so many different places. And I, of course, know how and where to access the information, but it's in bits and pieces that I have to pull together, which of course adds to the time burden.
Thank you, Nora. Tammy, you've been a school leader. How do you help teachers with these types of burdens associated with accessing data and not having enough time to interpret and actually use the data?
You know, it's so unfortunate that so many teachers are experiencing what Nora just described as not being able to have the time to really do that deep dive into all the data. And a part of the problem is the platforms that they're using is just massive, or it could be a variety of different things that they're trying to draw from. So school leaders can't help teachers. And for starters, they can help by just creating an integrative, cohesive system. Now, whether that exists is the problem. And so it would be helpful if we had that kind of platform available. And so the question is, well, it's not necessarily a matter of having all of your assessments on one platform. What can you do? Can you align all of that data properly so that it's more accessible and efficient for teachers to use? School leaders can help in a few ways. One way is to make sure that teachers have the tools and understanding of how to analyze the data. We talk about data-driven learning, but are teachers actually data-driven? Another way school leaders can help is to have someone do the data dive for them. And if you can do that data dive and deliver that to teachers, at least it could help with some of that stress and time issue that we were talking about earlier.
Excellent. Thank you, Tammy. I appreciate your point about understanding the purpose of each type of assessment. I think that one of the issues that we run into whenever educators don't understand the particular purpose of the assessment is that they run the risk of using the information in ways in which the assessment results were not intended. And then that just ends up eating more of their time in ways that is unlikely to be very useful for them. Likewise, if the assessment results or the assessments are built on, say, academic standards that are not their state academic standards, then the information that they're going to be getting from those assessments may not be very relevant to how they are going to adjust their instruction. I think that as vendors, sometimes we can confuse that. Some assessment marketing makes claims that the assessments actually can't support. That can leave teachers and school leaders confused about what each assessment tool can and can't do. Nearly 3/4 of respondents say they're already using AI to help with the assessments or plan to do so soon. That surprised me because whenever I speak to educators, I hear a lot of hesitancy around using AI tools. I know that a lot of districts are still contemplating some of their policies around using these types of AI tools. There's a lot of focus on being careful, rolling them out, the extent of professional development that's needed, and so on. But as we look to the future of assessment, it seems pretty obvious that AI is going to play a role. Nora talked about how time-consuming assessments are. The survey makes it clear that many educators are turning to AI in part to help save time. The biggest benefit they identify is that AI can reduce educator time spent studying assessment data. And those already using AI say it's especially effective at scoring open-ended questions, suggesting instructional next steps based on the assessment results, and generating assessment questions. Nora, I understand that you use AI quite a bit with assessment. Can you talk about how you use it?
Yes, I use AI all the time, and some of my favorite tools include Perplexity, Magic School AI, and Conmigo. AI can help educators analyze assessment data. As we discussed, results are thrown at us from so many different places and platforms, and you can bring them together and ask questions to understand what all of the different numbers, standards, and results mean. I also use AI to suggest small groups as well as a scope and sequence for those small groups based on assessment results. But personally, for me, AI is the most time saving when it comes to creating assessments. I used to spend a lot of time creating, differentiating, and adapting assessments for students. I have a lot of different grade levels within my 5th grade classroom. But now I'm able to use AI to differentiate problem sets, engineer texts, and really make sure everything that I'm presenting to my students is adapted and accessible to them. And it's a huge time saver in that regard. As teachers, we are given a standardized curriculum for a specific grade level, but of course, good administrators will tell you that you need to adapt that to your students' levels and meet your students where they're at, whether that's moving up or moving down. With AI, I don't have to start from scratch because that adaptation, it takes a lot of time and a lot of knowledge building. What is generated by AI can be a really powerful jumping off point for me.
That's great, Nora. Thank you. It's exciting to hear all the different ways that you're using it. I appreciate you sharing that with us. Tammy, I'd like to get the school leader's perspective on AI. Not all teachers are going to be as comfortable using AI as Nora is. Have you approached integrating AI into assessment with the teachers that you work with?
Honestly, I was so surprised by this data that came out of the survey, because in my experience, I have not been seeing teachers use AI for assessments. I think that they could be potentially using it for creating curriculum and doing other wonderful things with it, but not so much for the purpose of assessment. Now, I'm in Orange County, California. There's about 28 school districts in Orange County, and the Orange County Department of Education is spearheading an effort right now as we speak in order to help districts adopt policies around AI and have conversations that would empower teachers to use AI as an assessment. Not everybody's so ahead of the curve like Nora. Like, I was very impressed with how she's using it. But the reality is that there's huge gaps in how teachers are using it. And we just don't really have a sense of how many teachers have skills in order to do what can be done with it. And I really think as a school leader, I've noticed that working with my staff to start this process is slow going. And it is time consuming even to embed professional development and take the time to do the teaching, the professional development around AI is another challenge. So I think that not as many teachers are comfortable with AI as I would hope at this point. And I think that there's an opportunity here for school leaders to embed the professional development during staff meetings, during PLC time, and give them an opportunity to build those skills if and when they need it. But it really is going to take a big push because I, like Nora, believes that AI can really make a big difference in how we are efficient with our students. And to make sure that the data analysis, as I mentioned earlier, is allowing teachers a time, because they have limited amount of time and we don't want to overwhelm them. I love doing data dives and data talks with my staff. We would sit together as a team. We would pull up data sets and analyze it together. But I definitely felt the sense that it was an exhausting process for them. And even though they're eager to help their students, they're also overburdened. So I like to think of how in one example, I used nonfiction text and very quickly inputted it into AI and asked AI to generate some formative assessments. And the teachers got really excited because they could do a quick check. And then you can ask generative AI, what do I do to extend and enrich this learning when students are ready to move forward? And what do I need to do to remediate for students who may not comprehend or understand the text? So there is excitement around it. And there's also, like I said, there's a lot of fear and there's a gap in maybe what the skill set is at this time. I do think that we can do a lot with it, and that connection to really look at how we can inform instruction is exciting, and there's a lot of potential there. Teachers are capable. We just need to give them the tools in order to help them move forward in using it.
Oh, thank you, Tammy. That was great. One thing that it was interesting to me is that both you and Nora make a really important point. AI can be really helpful in giving teachers just a place to start instead of staring at a blank screen or a blank sheet of paper. You could ask generative AI to suggest some test questions on, say, third grade fractions based on your content standards. You don't have to accept the suggestion blindly. It at least gives you, again, that place to start that then you could decide whether you're going to use it or not, or edit it. But at the very least, it's a partner in brainstorming and hopefully save some time. A lot of the enthusiasm for AI shown in the survey seems to stem from frustrations with current assessment tools and practices. But as we look to the future of assessment, it's also important to note that AI isn't necessarily a panacea. Here's an example. Yes, AI gives you an easy way to analyze data points and guide next instructional steps. But what happens if the assessment data AI analyzes isn't valid and reliable? So I mentioned an earlier example about perhaps the measure that you are administering is not aligned to your state standards. So regardless of how well the AI engine does to give you some insights, they may be inaccurate or misleading simply because the measure isn't aligned to your particular learning objectives. So you might save some time in the short term in terms of getting some information back, but ultimately it could lead you and your students down the wrong path if the measure itself, again, isn't valid and reliable. So as we look at where assessments are going or should be going, what do you want our viewers to think about? Nora, why don't we go ahead and start with you?
I agree with the points you make. AI is a powerful tool, but it's just that, a tool. It's not a fix-all or catch-all for anything. I primarily use AI in creating assessments for students because that's what eats up most of my time, and I do have the autonomy to do that within my classroom. But if teachers were provided with reliable systems for assessments in the first place, including training, as Tammy mentioned, and implementation, then we wouldn't have to rely so much on AI and risk falling into the pitfalls, Amy, that you were just discussing. And also, as important as assessments are, they should also be thought of in the same way as AI. They're just a tool. I think that our education system places way too much of an emphasis on testing, and that's really something students will have to navigate as they move through the schooling system. But when we're talking about data-driven instruction, teachers have a lot of ways to observe and assess students, both quantitative and qualitative methods. And those methods can be often more equitable, as well as paint a fuller picture of what a student knows than just a test score.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nora. You're right about the range of data available to teachers. I see education moving to a data ocean, whereas too often we've been in this data desert currently. I think the trick is going to be, if we're in a data ocean, how do we create an ecosystem so that it's not just bits and pieces of information strewn all over the place, but it's more of a comprehensive ecosystem where the data really works together and serves as a rich resource for personalizing the learning journey. Tammy, where do you see assessment going in the future?
Well, first of all, I do see AI being a big part of this future assessment. I think it's going to be critical that we are all skilled at understanding its limitations and also its abilities of what it can do. But ultimately, what it comes down to is really understanding what is beyond AI. And that means empowering teachers and leaders specifically to allow teachers to use data for the real reason why it exists, is to make student learning more significantly better for them. And if we do that, that's going to be when we improve student outcomes. I'd like to say that we can empower teachers to shift even their pacing of their day, of their week, based on the assessments that are being given to them. And that flexibility is really important, because I had a teacher come to me and say, hey, I just did a formative assessment and we're not ready to do that benchmark on Friday. Mm-hmm. Can we change the date? Can we move it off a day or two? And they provided me with some real evidence to support that they felt an additional day of instruction could make a very big impact. And I was excited that they were being critical of their own pacing, and that would allow them to ultimately help their students grow and learn. So I want teachers to feel that they don't have to just rush through content. And we can support that if we can allow teachers to come to us, or even not come to us, have that flexibility to do it on their own, because we have faith and believe that they're capable. But ultimately, I want to say, to be truly student driven, then we need to do what's right for students. And sometimes that will require school leaders and teachers to shift that approach. And it can be hard to move away from what we've been doing for a long time, or even what we consider to be the status quo. But doing so at this time can be really impactful and important.
Thank you so much, Tammy and Nora. It's been so much fun getting to know you through this whole process. You've given us excellent insights on some of the different challenges teachers are currently facing, as well as what our opportunities might be in the future with assessments. We're going to shift now to take some questions from the viewers. I'm sure that they have a lot, so let's take a look and see what we've got. All right. As a teacher, I'm expected to administer a lot of assessments, but we use several different tools and don't get much training in how to use them to inform instruction. We've asked leadership to take a fresh look at our assessment program, but do you have any tips for things I can do myself to make assessment more effective in the short term? Nora, since this question appears to be from a teacher, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to respond first, and then Tammy, if you don't mind, after Nora's done.
Yeah, I would say when it comes to those really broad benchmark or baseline assessments at the school or district level, it's really useful to zoom in on specific information that you know you're looking for. You're going to get a whole bunch of information about how each student is doing on maybe all the standards in the grade, but can you pinpoint what is happening next in your classroom and look for a filter in the tool to find how kids are doing with a certain skill that is going to be used maybe next week or in the next 2 weeks. That sort of zooming in can really help you not only adapt your instruction and actually use assessment results in the classroom, but also feel a little less overwhelmed by all the data you're getting for all of your students. Another piece of advice is, I would say, to take advantage of in-class assessments. Of course, we can't change the school, district, or state assessments, but what you give in your class, formative assessments, progress monitors, even like unit tests, you can and probably should be changing and differentiating those for students. And that is where you can make sure assessments are accessible and gear the questions you're asking even to the information you want to get about your students. Finally, I would say it's really encouraging to have school leaders that want you to take advantage of the non-traditional ways of assessment. Like not everything has to be a test, and especially in a school where there are a lot of students who have IEPs or students who are still learning English, embracing a lot of different methods of assessment and ways of learning and knowing is extremely important.
Great, thank you. Tammy, what about you?
I mean, I love, Nora, that you just mentioned just in the last bit about how important it is to understand there's different kinds of assessment and to embrace that difference in how students show us what they know and what they've learned. So I appreciate you mentioning that. I think that we have to remind ourselves there's all different kinds of portfolio assessments. There's such a wide range. And for schools to start to embrace that allows us to celebrate learning in a more meaningful way as well. Rather than just have it be evaluative, we want students to get excited about their own process of learning, to engage them in their own reflective assessment. And I think that there is a lot of research to support that metacognitive process is also a way of building knowledge for students.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Tammy, we're going to stick with you. You talked about some of the different benefits for using AI. Could you share some of the risks that you also see?
I do think that we need to be very savvy in our knowledge around what it's producing. I think that you still have to be a subject knowledge expert and don't just rely on what AI is producing. You have to have your own critical analysis. So there is still that need for skills around the content to make sure that it has not generated misinformation, and actually have that even be a part of the students' learning around AI, is to teach them how to be thoughtful, critical thinkers when they use it, so that they too are not just succumbing and relying to information without using their own critical thinking.
Great. And I apologize. It probably feels like I'm picking on you, Tammy, but I'm going to go ahead and we have another question that I think you would be really good for. You mentioned that many teachers didn't use AI even after you walked them through how it could save them time and improve assessment. So this person wants to know, how do you think school leaders can overcome this level of discomfort or resistance?
I really appreciate that having new information and taking time to learn it is uncomfortable. And just as we create discomfort in our students, we also ask them to have a growth mindset. And I think that we can remind ourselves of how to practice that as well as teachers and educators and move through it together. I do think it's helpful and important for school leaders to meet teachers where they're at without allowing them to be fixed where they're at. And so I think plotting out a timeline, talking about that with them and saying, how much education, how much professional development will we need to get to point A to point, B. And I think mapping that out with them is creating less anxiety around the fact that we need to learn these skills. And I think that that's a part of our role as educational leaders, is to move people along without making them push back too hard where they get too stuck. And that's where all of that skill comes in around the psychology of learning that we ask our teachers to use with our students. We all too need to use it with adults.
Yep, absolutely. All right, Nora, I found one for you. Our school experiences a lot of the assessment problems you talked about, especially in terms of having data all over the place. What should we be looking for in an effective assessment system?
I really resonated with what Tammy said earlier about assessments and assessment systems being far too evaluative and not geared enough towards changing what we're doing in the classroom and how we're learning tomorrow. I would like to see an assessment system that is more explicit in which specific skills students are missing. It can be useful to see that a student doesn't reach the grade level standards, but there are so many prerequisite skills from other grades that go into achieving that standard, knowing those skills could help me then push each student to the next level.
Yep.
In addition to that, another example would be with small groups. An assessment system could itself analyze data from the assessment and then suggest small groups that teachers could then refine. Assessment systems could also present a scope and sequence and even resources that teachers could use for that small group. And this would be great for pushing learning forward, and also would be, again, another time-saving aspect for teachers.
That's awesome. Thank you, Nora. Okay, this will be for both of you. Let's see. What are the most common flaws you see in schools' assessment systems? Nora, you want to go first?
Yeah. I just think that school assessment systems need to be considered in the broadest possible sense. The system is not just the platform or the brand that students see, but also training that needs to be provided to teachers on how to implement assessments and analyze data, which Tammy talked about a lot earlier. She is not my school leader, but she obviously sounds like a fabulous school leader. But really too often, this training is not provided, or it's only minimally provided. So school assessment systems really need to include thorough training for teachers so they can effectively use assessment data to drive instruction. And school leaders should also be really clear in how they expect teachers to be using assessment data on a regular basis and how that should look in the classroom.
Great. Tammy, what are your thoughts about the most common flaws you see in schools' assessment systems?
So the system of itself is problematic when it comes to grading, because a lot of the time the teachers are being asked to input grades, especially in secondary education, based on these assessments. And one of the challenges that I have with that is that if a student is being graded on an assessment, and then they learn the material, and shortly thereafter they can show competency, that prior assessment score is included in their final grade. And I think we need to really rethink how we're using that information to ultimately show evidence that the student learned the content. And I do think that there is a way to rethink the value of assessment. And I think that students have a lot of anxiety and depression that we're concerned about. And we certainly don't want assessments to be one of the reasons why students are having and exhibiting these issues. So I do think that we need to rethink how it's psychologically and emotionally impacting students, as well as how we're using it to show evidence of competency.
Great, thank you. All right, Tammy, I've got another one for you. With AI advancing so rapidly, how can districts' AI policies keep up with the changes?
I really think that our county departments of education will be an asset for districts going forward, because like teachers in a classroom, districts are also overwhelmed with reporting and so much important pieces to running a district. So those departments of education can align and understand the policies and provide that information to districts to then have that ability to make decisions. And I also think that boards of education, who are the ones approving these policies, need time and information and research evidence to help them inform their decisions in creating these policies. But we need to embrace it. We need to be thoughtful. And, you know, throughout history and education, anytime there's a new curriculum or a new methodology, we all should be thoughtful and critical of how we're going to embrace it and adopt it. And this too is one of those times we just can't sit on it for very long. We need to move and adapt and evolve with the reality. And that means carving out significant time right now to understand the impact of AI and develop policies based on what students need best, and so that they can grow and develop. It's a part of their job future. So we cannot deny that AI is going to be a very big part of their future in whatever fields they're going to be in. So I'm all about embracing the future, and I think that districts need to create policies to support that.
Thank you so much. I have heard the phrase, the genie is out of the bottle, more times like in the last year than I have like the entire time I've been on this planet. So I think that's a good note for us to end on. Thank you again to our panelists, Dr. Tammy Kieses and Nora Bowles. You guys are awesome. And I wish that there was a way I could observe you working with teachers and with kids, because I just have a feeling you're completely fantastic at it. If you asked a question during the Q&A that we weren't able to get to, the Pearson team will follow up by email to give you an answer, so don't worry about that. I did want to take a minute to sum up 5 key takeaways from the survey and also from this conversation. The first one is that educators believe in the importance of assessments. That's very clear, but they say their current tools aren't nearly effective enough. So we've got some work to do there. Assessment gaps appear in the areas educators consider most important to assess. This includes things like critical thinking, problem solving, gauging students' progress towards specific learning targets. The assessment burden is real. Most educators worry about how much time assessments take, but the underlying issue is that many teachers don't see enough value in their current assessment tools and aren't using assessments to inform instruction. So if they're not going to use it, it's not going to be worth their time. Simply saving teachers time on assessments won't address that core issue. Many K-12 educators are turning to AI for help, which is exciting, from generating assessment questions to analyzing results to recommending how to tailor instruction based on the results. There is a way past these challenges. School leaders can support teachers and students, not just by harnessing AI, but ensuring high-quality assessments that produce valid and reliable data. It's the best way to improve teaching and learning. Thank you, everyone. If this webinar has you thinking about enhancing assessments to improve instruction, please visit this website for more information. And back to you, Laura Beth.
Excellent. Well, thank you to our panelists for such a great discussion. Today's webinar will be available on demand if you want to review anything that was talked about today. Thank you for watching and have a great day.